Dad's silent revenge.
The moment my son Michael adjusted his baseball cap 3 times during our Sunday barbecue, every instinct I had developed over 25 years with the FBI came roaring back to life. He was 30 years old now, standing next to his girlfriend Angela Brooks, listening to her explain some investment opportunity to my wife Patricia. But that cap adjustment, 3 deliberate touches to the brim, was our old signal from when he was 8 years old and wanted out of a situation without making a scene. My name is Vincent Taylor. I'm 59 years old, and I spent a quarter-century working financial crimes for the FBI before taking early retirement to consult for the SEC. I've sat across from some of the most convincing liars you could ever meet. And right then, watching Angela gesture enthusiastically about alternative investment structures, I had the sinking feeling I was looking at another one. We were out on our back deck in Marietta, just north of Atlanta. It was one of those perfect September afternoons where the humidity finally breaks, and you remember why you love Georgia. The deck overlooks our backyard, where I'd taught Michael to throw a baseball 20 years ago, where Patricia had planted her vegetable garden that now supplied half our Sunday dinners. Tall oak trees provided shade over the weathered picnic table I'd built when we first moved here in 2001. Patricia had made her famous potato salad, the one with the mustard and dill that Michael still requests every time he comes over. I was manning my trusty Weber grill, the same one I'd been using for 15 years of Sunday family barbecues. The ritual never changed much. Patricia would prep the sides, I'd handle the meat, and we'd spend the afternoon catching up on Michael's work week, local news, whatever was on our minds. Michael and Angela had been dating for about 4 months now. They'd met through some dating app. Bumble, I think he said. And this was maybe her 6th or 7th time joining our weekly family gathering. She'd moved in with him about 6 weeks ago, which seemed fast to me, but I kept my mouth shut. At 30, Michael was old enough to make his own decisions about relationships. Angela seemed nice enough on the surface. She was 32, attractive in that polished professional way, and worked in what she called boutique wealth management. She had this knack for making everyone feel like the most interesting person in the room. She remembered that Patricia took her iced tea unsweetened, asked thoughtful questions about my consulting work with the SEC, and laughed at the right moments during Michael's stories about debugging software at his engineering job downtown. But something about the way she talked about money had been making my radar ping for weeks now. The thing is, Angela was saying, settling back in her chair with that confident smile of hers, most people are leaving so much opportunity on the table with their retirement accounts. The big firms, they keep you in these mutual funds that barely beat inflation because that's where their commissions are. I flipped the burgers on the grill and kept listening. In my FBI days, I'd learned that people revealed more when they thought you weren't paying close attention. There's this whole world of private investment opportunities that regular people never even hear about, she continued, her voice taking on that excited tone of someone sharing insider knowledge. Real estate development projects in emerging markets, agricultural partnerships in South America, energy infrastructure deals in Texas. The returns can be 3 or 4 times what you'd see in traditional investments. That's when Michael touched his cap the first time. Just a quick adjustment, like he was shading his eyes from the late afternoon sun filtering through the oak leaves. I'd seen this exact pitch before, maybe 50 times in my career. The suggestion that mainstream financial institutions were somehow holding regular people back from better opportunities. The vague language about emerging markets and alternative investments. The promise of returns that sounded too good to be true because they usually were. How much oversight do these private deals typically have? I asked, keeping my tone casual while I moved the corn around on the grill. The question came out more naturally than it should have, the way it did when I was still carrying a badge. Angela's smile got even brighter, like I'd asked exactly the right question. Well, that's actually one of the major advantages. Less regulatory red tape means faster movement of capital, which is where the real returns come from. These opportunities move quickly. You have to be able to act when the right deal presents itself. Second cap adjustment from Michael. This one was more deliberate, his fingers lingering on the brim for just a moment longer than natural. I'd heard less regulatory red tape more times than I could count. It was fraudster speak for unregistered. Securities and no government oversight. In legitimate investment circles, regulation wasn't red tape, it was protection. That sounds fascinating, Patricia said, though I could tell from the slight change in her voice that she was picking up on something too. After 32 years of marriage, she could read my face like a weather map. She knew my work mode expression when she saw it. "Have you helped Michael look at any of these opportunities?" Patricia continued, her tone perfectly pleasant and interested. "Actually," Angela said, reaching over to touch Michael's arm in that casual way couples do, "we've been talking about his 401k situation. He's got about $185,000 built up, which is really fantastic for someone his age. But sitting in those index funds, it's probably only growing at, 7 or 8% annually? I could show him how to restructure that into something that could easily double or triple those returns." Third cap adjustment. There it was. The signal we'd invented when Michael was in Little League, sitting through one of those interminable games where the pitcher was walking everyone, and the coaches kept arguing with the umpire. He'd been miserable, hot, and bored, and he just wanted to go home. That's when he'd touched his cap 3 times and looked at me with this expression that said, "Dad, get me out of this situation." From that day forward, 3 cap touches meant I need help, but I don't want to make it obvious. He hadn't used that signal in over 20 years. My mind was racing now, putting together pieces I'd been unconsciously collecting for weeks. Angela's questions about Michael's job, his salary, his benefits package, the way she'd steered conversations toward financial planning and retirement strategies, how she'd mentioned more than once that Michael was so responsible with his money, always in that admiring tone that made it sound like a compliment, but felt like an assessment. "Honey," Patricia said, standing up smoothly from her chair, "why, don't you show Angela those photos from our anniversary trip to Savannah while I help Vincent get these sides ready? Bless that woman. She'd caught the shift in my posture when Angela mentioned regulatory red tape, and she was buying me time to think. Patricia had been married to a federal agent long enough to recognize when I needed a moment to process information. "Oh, I'd love to see those," Angela said brightly, following Patricia toward the sliding glass door. "Michael told me you two had such a romantic time there." Once they were inside, Michael walked over to the grill where I was standing. He kept his voice low, glancing toward the house to make sure they were out of earshot. "I know what you're thinking," he said quietly. "Tell me what I'm thinking," I replied, not looking up from the corn I was turning. "You're thinking something's off about Angela." I set down my grilling tongs and looked at my son. He had that same serious expression he'd worn as a kid when he was trying to work through a problem that was bigger than he was. "I'm thinking I'd like to hear what you've been thinking," I said. Michael rubbed the back of his neck, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw was set. He'd been carrying this weight for a while. "She moved in with me 6 weeks ago," he began. "Said her lease was up, and she needed a couple months to find something new. I wanted her to move in, so I didn't think anything of it at first. But then she started asking a lot of questions about my finances. I kept my expression neutral, the way I'd learned to do during suspect interviews. Let him talk, don't interrupt. Let the story come out naturally. At first it seemed like normal relationship stuff, planning for the future together. She'd ask about my 401k, my salary, whether I had any debt. She said she was impressed by how responsible I was, how I'd managed to save so much by my age. What kind of questions? Specifically, I asked. She wanted to see my quarterly statements, said she could help me optimize my portfolio, maybe move some money around to get better returns. She's got all these investment documents, prospectuses, performance charts going back years for something called the Southern Capital Private Investment Fund. My stomach dropped. "Michael, how much detail has she gotten about your retirement account?" "She knows the exact balance, $185,000. She's seen all my statements, knows how it's allocated, what funds I'm in." He paused, looking uncomfortable. "She said it was just so we could plan our financial future together. If we got married someday." There it was, the emotional hook that made the whole scheme work. And she wasn't just targeting his money, she was targeting his hopes for their relationship. "Has she asked you to move any money yet?" I kept my voice level, professional. "Not directly asked, but she's been building up to it for weeks. She keeps talking about this amazing opportunity, how the fund managers only accept a limited number of new investors each quarter. She emailed me a subscription agreement last week." The subscription agreement, that's where they always showed their hand. Said there was no pressure, Michael continued. but the intake window for new investors closes at the end of September. That's next week. Artificial urgency. Create a deadline, make the mark feel like they might miss out on something exclusive. It was textbook fraud psychology. I need you to forward me that email tonight, I said quietly. Before she leaves, Michael looked conflicted. Dad, I don't want you to think I can't handle my own relationship or... Michael, I put my hand on his shoulder. You came to me. That signal we had when you were 8 years old, sitting through Uncle Rick's endless stories about municipal water systems. You used it today because some part of you knows something isn't right. I'm not questioning your judgment. I'm asking you to let me help you figure out what we're dealing with. He was quiet for a moment, then nodded. Yeah? Okay, I'll send it tonight. I could hear Patricia and Angela laughing about something inside the house. Through the sliding door, I could see them looking at photos on Patricia's phone, Angela playing the part of the interested girlfriend perfectly. She was good at this. Very good. How long has she been talking about this investment opportunity? I asked. Maybe 3 weeks now. She started with general stuff about how my 401k could be doing better, then gradually got more specific about this particular fund. She's got documentation that looks really professional. Logos, performance charts, regulatory disclaimers. She said the fund focuses on private credit facilities backed by real estate and energy assets. Private credit facilities. That was sophisticated language for someone who was supposedly just a boutique wealth advisor. In my experience, real financial advisors talked about specific investments, this REIT, that bond fund. They didn't deal in vague concepts like private credit facilities. Has she mentioned any of her other clients? Talked about success stories? Actually, yeah. She told me about this client who invested $200,000 last year and has already seen a 19% return. Said he was so happy he's planning to move more money over this quarter. A success story with specific numbers. Another classic element of investment fraud. Create social proof with detailed examples that couldn't be verified. Patricia and Angela were heading back outside now, Angela carrying 2 glasses of iced tea. Her smile was warm and natural as she handed one to Michael, every gesture calculated to reinforce the image of a caring girlfriend looking out for her boyfriend's best interests. Vincent, your wife was just telling me about your FBI career, Angela said as they rejoined us. That must have been so exciting. What kind of cases did you work on? The question hit me, like a fishing line cast perfectly into still water. She was probing, trying to understand exactly what kind of expertise she was dealing with. In my experience, innocent people didn't need to know the scope of a federal agent's background. Guilty people always did. Oh, mostly financial crimes, I said casually, flipping the last of the burgers. Ponzi schemes, investment fraud, that sort of thing. Not nearly as exciting as it sounds on TV. I watched her face carefully as I spoke. Most people would follow up with curiosity about specific cases or ask what financial fraud was like to investigate. Angela just nodded and smiled. That must have given you a really good eye for spotting dishonest people, she said. There it was again. An innocent person would have said something like, that must have been interesting, or, I bet you have some stories. Angela had gone straight to wondering about my ability to detect deception. Sometimes, I replied, though the really good ones are harder to spot than people think. The best fraudsters don't look like criminals. They're charming, professional, often very intelligent. They know exactly what people want to hear. Angela laughed, but I caught something behind her eyes. A flicker of calculation, like she was recalibrating something. We finished the barbecue with Angela being her usual charming self. She helped Patricia clear the dishes without being asked, complimented the potato salad recipe, asked thoughtful questions about our neighborhood. She was warm and engaging for the rest of the afternoon, playing her role perfectly. But I noticed small things now that my suspicion was activated. The way she steered conversations away from specific details about her own work. How she remembered everything about Michael's finances, but was vague about her own background. The fact that in 6 visits to our house, she'd never once mentioned her own family or childhood. After they left around 6 p.m., Patricia stood at the kitchen sink, washing glasses, and didn't say anything for a long moment. I knew she was processing, the same way she did after parent-teacher conferences when Michael was in school, and she needed to figure out if a teacher was telling her the whole truth. You saw it too, I said, drying a plate with the dish towel. I saw you go into work mode when she started talking about regulations, Patricia replied. That's your face when you're deciding whether someone's lying to you. I told Patricia about the conversation with Michael, about the baseball cap signal, about the subscription agreement that was supposedly due by month's end. She listened without interrupting, asking only a few clarifying questions. "What do you want to do?" she asked when I finished. "I need to see that email he's forwarding me, and I need to make some calls tomorrow." Patricia nodded. "What do you need from me?" "If Michael brings her around again, just act normal. Don't let on that anything's changed." The email Michael forwarded that night was 18 pages of professional-looking nonsense. I printed it out and spread it across our dining room table, the same way I used to review case files when I was still with the Bureau. Patricia made coffee and sat across from me, occasionally asking questions about what I was seeing. The letterhead looked legitimate, Southern Capital Investment Corporation, with a business address on Peachtree Street in downtown Atlanta. The performance charts showed 8 years of consistent returns between 15% and 22% annually. The language was sophisticated, full of terms like private credit facilities and alternative asset allocation strategies. But there were problems everywhere once you knew how to look. The performance charts cited no independent auditor. The risk disclosures referred to something called the Southern Capital Investor Protection Program, which was described in a separate document that wasn't attached and wasn't linked. The fund's investment strategy involved private credit facilities secured by diverse asset portfolios, which was language so vague it could mean anything or nothing. Most telling was the business address. The Peachtree Street location looked impressive on letterhead, but when I looked it up online, it was a mail forwarding service. You could rent that address for $50 a month and have your mail forwarded anywhere in the world. "This is all fake," I told Patricia around midnight, pushing the documents across the table to her. Professional-looking fake, but fake. I had 2 calls to make in the morning. The first was to Sandra Martinez, who ran white-collar investigations for the SEC's Atlanta office. Sandra and I had worked 3 cases together when I was still with the Bureau: a mortgage fraud ring that had stolen $12 million from elderly homeowners, a fake hedge fund that targeted church congregations, and a cryptocurrency scheme that had bilked investors out of $30 million. She was sharp, thorough, and she owed me a favor from the cryptocurrency case where my financial analysis had helped secure convictions. The second call was to Paul Henderson, a forensic accountant who'd spent 15 years with the FBI before going private. Paul had this gift for looking at financial documents and seeing the mathematical impossibilities that most people missed. He could spot cooked books from across the room and explain complex fraud schemes in language that juries could understand. I texted them both that night, saying I had a potential fraud situation and needed their expertise. Both responded within an hour, agreeing to take my calls first thing in the morning. Sandra called me at 8:30 sharp. I gave her Angela's name, the fund information, and the Peachtree Street address, along with what I knew about her relationship with Michael. "Give me 2 hours," she said. "I'll run everything through our databases and see what comes back." Paul called at 9:15. I read him the relevant sections of the subscription agreement over the phone, and he stopped me twice to ask me to repeat specific language. "Vincent," he said when I finished reading, "this section about diverse asset portfolios securing the credit facilities. There's no actual description of what those assets are supposed to be. A legitimate private investment fund would have detailed schedules listing every piece of collateral with independent appraisals and clear valuation methods. What does that tell you? It tells me that if someone invested in this fund and it claimed the assets lost value, there would be no way to verify that any assets ever existed in the first place. It's a shell game without even any shells." Sandra called back at 10:45, and I could hear that particular flatness in her voice that meant bad news. "She's real," Sandra said. "Angela Brooks, 32 years old, grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, studied finance at Auburn University, worked 2 years at a legitimate wealth management firm in Jacksonville before they let her go in 2019. What was the complaint? Inappropriate client relationships. She was steering elderly clients toward unregistered investment products and taking undisclosed commissions. The firm caught it before any money actually moved, but she was terminated and reported to FINRA. She's been off the radar since then. So this isn't her first attempt. Vincent, we've been tracking what we think is the same pattern across Georgia, Florida, and Alabama. Always romantic relationships with men who have significant retirement savings. Always the same kind of fake fun documentation. We believe she's successfully taken at least $420,000 from 5 different victims over the past 18 months. I felt that familiar anger that came with realizing how many people had been hurt by someone like this. 5 families who'd lost their retirement savings to someone they had trusted with their hearts. How close is she to making the ask with Michael? Sandra continued. Subscription agreement already sent with a month end. Deadline. That's next week. Then she's probably planning to push for the wire transfer this week. Once that money leaves his 401k account, it'll disappear into shell companies and offshore accounts faster than we can trace it. We both knew what that meant. Financial fraud cases were winnable when you caught them early. Once the money was gone, recovery rates dropped to almost nothing. What do you need from me? I asked. I need Michael to agree to one more meeting with her. I need her on tape, making the investment pitch and asking him to commit specific funds to specific accounts. Georgia is a one-party consent state. If Michael records his own conversation, that recording is admissible in federal court. I drove to Michael's apartment that afternoon. He lived in a converted warehouse in the Virginia Highland neighborhood, one of those trendy areas where young professionals paid premium rent for exposed brick walls and concrete floors. His place was neat, organized, decorated, with the kind of furniture you buy when you're 30 and finally making good money, but don't know if you're staying put long enough to invest in anything permanent. I sat on his leather couch and told him everything. The mail forwarding address, Paul's analysis of the subscription agreement, Sandra's investigation into Angela's background, the 5 previous victims who'd lost their life savings. Michael listened without interrupting, his face getting more serious as I laid out each piece of evidence. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. She told me she loved me last week, he said finally, not angry, just processing the mathematics of betrayal. I'm sorry, son. He stood up and walked to his kitchen window, looking out at the city skyline. How long do you think she's been planning this? Probably from the first date. These people are patient. They build real emotional connections because that's what makes the fraud work. The time you've spent together, the feelings you've developed, those are real. Her motivations are what's fake. Michael turned around. What do I need to do? I explained about the recording. He would need to meet with her and let her make the complete pitch. Let her ask for the money transfer. Let her name specific amounts, specific accounts, specific timelines. He needed to act interested but not overeager, and most importantly, not give her any reason to think anything had changed. Can you do that? I asked. Michael looked at me with those steady eyes he'd had since he was a kid. Yeah, Dad. I can sit across from her for an hour and let her lie to me. He called Angela that evening and told her he'd been thinking seriously about the investment opportunity and wanted to sit down to go through all the details properly. She suggested coffee Thursday afternoon at a place in Buckhead, one of those upscale cafes where business people met for discreet conversations. She sounded pleased, unhurried, exactly the right amount of enthusiastic, everything perfectly calibrated to make him feel like this was his idea, his timeline. Thursday morning, I drove back to Michael's apartment. We sat at his kitchen table while I walked him through the technical details. Keep his phone in his shirt pocket, screen facing in. Use the voice memo app, which would record even if the phone went to sleep. Let her talk. Don't rush her. If she paused, let the silence sit. People always fill silence, usually with more information than they intended to give. Ask clarifying questions in a neutral tone, I instructed. Don't be confrontational. Don't be overly eager. Be a guy who's 95% ready to say yes, but wants to make sure he understands everything. How are you feeling? I asked. Honestly, angry. But it's focused anger. The kind where you just want to get the job done right. That's exactly the right mindset. Stay there. I went home and sat with Patricia in our kitchen. She made coffee and we listened to the radio while we waited. Neither of us talked much. There wasn't much to say until we knew what Angela would reveal about herself when she thought she was closing the deal. Michael texted at 4:30. Done. I got everything. His voice on the phone was steady but thin, the way voices get when adrenaline is leaving your system. She was completely clear about everything, he told me. Described the fund structure in detail. projected returns of 18 to 22% annually, guaranteed. Said there was a preferred allocation available to investors who committed over $100,000, which would put me at the top tier for distributions. Did she give you wire transfer instructions? Complete account information for a credit union in South Carolina. She said the fund managers preferred to work outside the big banks because of processing speed and regulatory flexibility. She said my money would be working for me within 48 hours of the transfer. 48 hours. I knew what that meant. By the time anyone realized the fund didn't exist and tried to trace the money, it would have moved through enough shell companies and international transfers to make recovery nearly impossible. She also said something interesting, Michael continued. She mentioned that her previous client, the one who made 19% returns, was looking to double his investment this quarter. She said successful investors understand that opportunities like this don't come around often, creating urgency with social proof, making Michael feel like he might miss out on something exclusive that other smart people were already doing. I called Sandra that evening. Michael sent her the audio file within an hour using a secure file transfer system. She listened to it overnight with her technical team. She called me at 7:30 the next morning. "It's more than enough," she said. "We're moving today." Angela Brooks was arrested at Michael's apartment Friday morning before 8 a.m. I know because Michael called me while it was happening, standing in his hallway in his socks, his voice quiet. "They're here, Dad. It's happening." "Good," I said. "Go put on some shoes, go outside, get some air." The investigation that followed revealed Angela had been running variations of the same scheme across 3 states. The Southern Capital Fund was one of 4 fraudulent investment vehicles she used, depending on her target. Total confirmed losses exceeded $420,000 across 5 victims that investigators could verify. Michael was the first one who hadn't lost a dollar. Angela Brooks was eventually sentenced to 7 years in federal prison for wire fraud and interstate financial crimes. Through asset forfeiture, the other victims recovered about 60% of their stolen money. It wasn't everything, but it was something. 2 weeks later, Michael came for Sunday barbecue again, just the 3 of us. Patricia made her fried chicken, and we sat at the same picnic table where 4 months of someone's careful deception had almost succeeded. Michael was quieter than usual, but not the anxious quiet from before, more settled, like something difficult was finished and he could finally breathe properly again. "I keep wondering how I didn't see it earlier," he said while we were cleaning up the dishes. "You did see it," I told him. "That's why you used the signal. I mean, before it got that far." I looked at my son, this person I'd watched grow from a kid who needed a secret baseball signal to escape boring little league games into a man who'd helped bring down a professional fraudster. Michael, she was very good at what she did. She had refined this approach across multiple victims. She knew exactly which emotional buttons to push: affection, trust, the promise of shared financial security. That's not a failure of your intelligence. That's her investing serious skill and preparation into deceiving you. He nodded slowly. "Most people don't listen to their instincts," I continued. "That's the real tragedy in these cases. People feel something's wrong, but they convince themselves they're being paranoid. They don't want to look suspicious or untrusting, so they wait. And while they're waiting, the window closes and their money disappears." We sat listening to the sounds of our neighborhood on a Sunday evening, kids playing basketball in a driveway down the street, someone mowing their lawn despite it being nearly dark. "Is she really going to serve 7 years?" Michael asked. "Federal prison, no parole. And there are 5 other families who now have some justice and some of their money back because you didn't let her finish what she started." He smiled at that, small but genuine. As someone who spent 25 years working financial crimes, there are things I want people to understand. Fraud like this succeeds because it targets the best parts of human nature, our capacity for trust, love, and hope. The most sophisticated financial predators don't look for stupid victims. They look for emotionally available ones. The red flags are often only visible in hindsight or to someone outside the relationship. Investment returns consistently above 10% annually should prompt serious questions. Any fund that can't be verified through SEC databases, business addresses that turn out to be mail services, pressure around artificial deadlines. In the United States, legitimate investment advisors must be registered with the SEC. You can verify anyone through the Investment Advisor Public Disclosure Database at advisorinfo.sec.gov. It takes 3 minutes and could save your retirement and this. If someone you love reaches out in whatever way they know how, with whatever signal they have, please listen. Michael used a baseball cap adjustment we'd invented for a child's problem. He used it because some part of him understood, before his conscious mind was ready to admit it, that he needed help. That instinct is worth more than any financial document. Trust it in yourself and protect it in the people you love. We didn't lose a dollar, but we almost did. The difference was a 30-year-old man at a family barbecue who remembered that his father would understand what 3 touches to a baseball cap meant, even after 20 years. Sometimes the greatest protection we can give our children isn't shielding them from danger, but teaching them to recognize when they need help, and ensuring they always know we'll be there when they ask for it. Trust isn't just about believing in people. It's about believing in the signals they send us when something feels wrong, even when we can't yet explain why.